Iron Claw is a new biographical sports drama starring Zac Efron that tells the devastating true story behind the Von Erich family, namely the dynamic between the father and the sons. I don't want to get into spoilers for any of you who may not be, very aware of who this family is, what the story is behind them, but it ultimately focuses on the rise to fame in the WWE that these brothers had, and ultimately the horrific tragedy that befell on this family. As I mentioned before, I had no idea really who the Von Erich family was, who the brothers were. I'm admittedly not a big wrestling fan, so aside from really the guys who have basically become actors at this point, I don't know that many professional wrestlers. Never been that into the sport, never watched any WWE showdowns. It just wasn't for me. Which part of that made me a lot more intrigued to see this movie because I got to go into it completely blind. I had never heard of these brothers. I didn't know the story behind them. I didn't know the tragedy behind them. Which is actually pretty exciting in that sense. It's like I got to just go into this movie and just experience it. And what we got here is, I gotta tell you, this is the most emotionally devastating movie I have seen since I can't remember. Holy shit. Let's first talk about the big leading performance in this movie. Zac Efron is phenomenal in this. It's really been interesting to see Zac Efron's career take off. I really feel like, he started off on Disney Channel, and to see him here now, when you really think about it, I don't think there's too many actors who got their start on Disney Channel that really went on to become these great actors. I think Zendaya, maybe Shia LaBeouf, and Zac Efron. And that's it. As far as the Disney Channel stars I grew up with and I watched when I was watching Disney Channel, that's all I can think of. He's so fucking good in this movie. He's so transformative in this movie too. You barely recognize the guy. He's absolutely jacked out of his mind. I'm gonna say this right now. All the actors across the board, not just him, but the other actors who played the brothers, physically they got shredded for this movie, and I like seeing the commitment they clearly put themselves through to really accurately portray these wrestlers from a skills perspective. Not just from a physical perspective, but Zac Efron, he does such a tremendous job at giving such a dramatic role here. How hard he's physically pushing himself to try to be this great wrestler. You see the dynamic he has with his brother. That's the thing that I really want to touch on in this. I really felt a great brotherly connection and vibe between the brothers in this movie. The way they mess around with each other, the way they joke with each other, the way they train with each other and push one another. It felt real, it felt authentic, and that's a testament that goes to not just Zac Efron, but all the performances across the board from all the brothers. Also, alluding to what I was just talking about, I really do appreciate that this movie illustrates the physical strain that it takes to be a wrestler, because obviously the joke everyone says about the WWE and professional wrestling is it's not real, it's fake, but wrestlers don't like the word fake, they prefer the word fixed, because it's maybe the outcome of the game is rigged, you could say that, but wrestling itself is very, very real. You're still getting beat up in this ring. You're still going through physical hell in trying to train for it and trying to basically build up the endurance to take all the hits and the punishment you're going to still take in the ring. There is clearly a technique to be an all-time great wrestler, and I appreciate that this movie shows why everyone in the WWE is the way that they are when it comes to training and when it comes to wanting to be still the best wrestler in the game. But ultimately, the big driving force in this movie, the thing that I think really brings this movie up to next level shit, is the family dynamic. I already talked about the chemistry between the brothers and how they are together, how much they clearly loved one another, but the big driving force in this movie is how hard they're all trying to impress their father. Because the father, Fritz Von Erich, his whole deal is he used to be a professional wrestler. He wanted to get the big title shot. He never got it. So really, he's become this trainer, this coach to his sons. And he's ultimately trying to push them to become the wrestlers that he wanted to be. So as a result, you see a very interesting dynamic between him and his kids. There's one scene where he's like, you're my favorite, then you, then you, then you. But those rankings can all change. And you hear that at first, you kind of laugh at it, you chuckle at it, but you also think in your head, it's I mean, I don't have any kids, but aren't you kind of not supposed to have a favorite? Oh, no, at least if you do, I mean, don't tell them to their faces where they rank on the totem pole. But that's what makes it very interesting for the brothers. It's like, yeah, they're working to become these great wrestlers, but you do wonder to themselves, how much do they love wrestling for themselves? Do they just love it because it's an activity to do with their brothers? Or ultimately, do they love it because their father loves it and wants them to be successful at it? Because that is the real thing that hit me home right there. And I think will hit any son out there, at least any son that grew up with a father in their life. Because this is what that movie stresses. Every boy growing up, I can speak for myself personally, of course, grows up idolizing his father, loving his father, just wanting to do everything in the world to make their dad proud. Like, nobody else's approval matters in this world. As long as my dad thinks the world of me, that's what's important. And that's what you see in the brothers right here, because as brutal and as really, really tough love and as aggressively pushing as their father was. I mean, their father, he was trying to basically live vicariously through his son. So he's pushing them and probably not paying any mind to them when they really needed him to be a father. Regardless of all of that, there was no sign anywhere that they hated him or they were mad at him or anything like that. They loved him and they admired him and they idolized him and they wanted him to be proud. And that's what I think brings such a crushing emotion into this movie, because you see just how hard these guys are pushing themselves physically to try to be great, because they just want their father to acknowledge it. Another area in this movie that I'm really glad it touched on was also just mental health in general, especially in men, because, and I'm not trying to take mental illness away from anyone who goes through any of it. It's very real, it's very tough, and, a lot of people have had some really tough battles with it. Some people have unfortunately lost their fight with it, and it sucks. It's awful. But I do feel this movie does a very good job at really stressing how mental health in men is very, very tough. I once read a quote a long time ago that says something like, for young men, for really the boys really, when they go through that transition from becoming boys into men, that's when they quickly start learning. It's like, in a lot of ways, you're not going to be loved unconditionally anymore. It's like, what's that Chris Rock joke he makes? Like, only women, children, and dogs in this world are loved unconditionally. A man is only loved under the condition that he provides something. And that's what you see in these brothers here. They're fighting to be great. They're fighting for their father's approval, ultimately seeing who's going to become his favorite at various points. And because their father is such an iron-fisted, really tough son of a bitch, when they're going through a tough time, when they're going through this tragedy, where they're going through loss and grief, their father just doesn't want to see weakness in them. They're told not to be too emotional. They're told you gotta keep working hard, and even when you finally accomplish what you've accomplished, it's not enough. You gotta keep going. You gotta keep driving. Like, what you have, it's not enough. You have to keep pushing. Like, so much was put on these brothers, you almost feel to be this all-time great human being, and that's so much to put on anybody. And you just see the tragedy, that much stress and that much, you could say, obliviousness from the father in just how he was pushing these guys, just ultimately what it does to them, and it absolutely just cracks your soul. That's also an area that I really want to give credit to Lily James in this movie. She plays the woman who ultimately marries Kevin Von Erich, Zac Efron's character. She becomes his wife. And what I really love with their dynamic is, one, it felt very real. It felt very, sweet, charming, nice. But at the same time, you almost feel in a lot of ways the relationship and the love that he builds with her is ultimately what saves him. Like, having her ultimately as that security blanket in some ways. Like, he knows, I don't have to be a world champion for her to love me, for her to accept me, for her to embrace me. You almost feel, looking at that, you wonder to yourself, if he hadn't married her and built the life that he had with her, or ultimately built with her, would he have suffered the same fate and tragedy that his brothers ultimately went through? It's a very haunting realization, but it's also very beautiful when you put it in that perspective. As far as flaws with the movie go, this movie's definitely not an easy watch. That is for sure. This is not a movie that I'm just gonna, have people over and be like, guys, Iron Claw night tonight. We're gonna all watch it. It's gonna be awesome. And granted, this movie is awesome. Not taking anything away from that, but it's not exactly one of those movies that you can watch all that often because of the emotional toll that it does take on you. It's an extremely powerful and profound movie that just wipes you out. It's not one that, you can go back and revisit all the time. However, unlike Sound of Freedom, which I saw earlier this year, and I said that's probably a movie that's just too heavy-handed, I could probably only watch that one time, this movie, due to its story and performances, this is one that I absolutely believe I can revisit. Also, to this movie's credit, it made me want to learn more about the brothers. I did a little more research. I, looked up more of their story. And I will say, apparently there's another brother in the Von Erich family that's just not in the movie at all. So to me, that was a little bit interesting. I was like, oh, okay, well, why wasn't he in the movie? Why wasn't he a part of the story? And, my guess is maybe they just didn't want to make the movie too long. They could only give so much screen time to every brother, and I don't know, maybe he wasn't as involved as the others were. I don't know, that's left me with some questions for sure, but I'm a little surprised that his character arc was not seen in this true story. But all in all, The Iron Claw, it hit me like a harpoon. Zac Efron gives by far and away the best performance of his career. Does he deserve an Oscar nomination? I'm not opposed to it. The wrestling that's in this movie, it feels very real, it feels very authentic. You definitely have a bit more of an appreciation for the physical hell that professional wrestlers put themselves through. I did love the family dynamic that we see here, the relationship between the brothers and their father. It all feels very real, very authentic. It felt like a family. It's an extremely sad story. It's gonna wipe you out emotionally. And one thing that I have to say, the more and more I've been thinking about it, like for me, I think emotional wise, we had a little bit of a delayed fuse on me. Like initially when I walked out of it, I thought, wow, that movie was very powerful and very emotional. But as I was driving home, the more and more I was thinking about it, the more and more it was hitting me. And even still to this day, the more and more I think about it, it just, in a lot of ways, it just becomes more and more effective from an emotional standpoint the more and more you think about it. And as a result, I could see this being a movie that's only going to gradually get better as time goes on. And in the end, this is definitely not an easy movie to watch at all, but it's definitely one of the best movies I've seen all year. So that's all I gotta say, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video, and as always, don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.